We will keep today's presentation relatively short, about 30 minutes or so, and we've reserved the second half of the hour for questions and discussions with our two speakers. Since there are a lot of folks on the webinar, we ask that you type in your questions as they arise, and we'll read out the questions for the speaker at the end of the presentation. Today's webinar will be recorded and will be available on our website shortly. Next slide. On your screen, you'll notice a small collapsed control panel on the upper right-hand corner. By clicking on the next slide, by clicking on the arrow button, you can expand the control panel. Next slide. In this expanded control panel, you can send in a question. If you see the red arrow down on the sort of middle of the right-hand side of the screen, simply type your question into the chat area. Next. And press send, and the question will be sent to us to respond to at the end of the webinar. We have Liz Mack from Enviro Issues helping run the webinar and handle the questions, so you may hear me ask Liz one or two questions during the presentation. So let me introduce today's speakers. We have two speakers. The title of today is that what you need? Direct feedback helps climate change information exchange. Our main speaker is Dr. Dominique Bachelet, Senior Climate Change Scientist at the Conservation Biology Institute and Associate Professor at Oregon State University. And after Dominique's presentation, we have Dave Hopper from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Boise, Idaho, with some ideas about how he might use Dominique's tool. So Dominique, take it away.
Thank you, Todd. First, I want to thank the Great Basin LCC for hosting this webinar and give me the opportunity to reach a lot of folks out there. And I first want to begin by acknowledging my co-authors on this one, Melanie Brown, who was my undergrad student 2 years ago and since then has become a CBI employee, and then Mike Goff, who's a GIS analyst and who's been helping us putting together websites, and Dr. Barry Baker from Colorado State University and also CBI, who has been essential at analyzing climate data for us and providing the data that we serve on the web. Next, and I wanted to acknowledge the funders, both BLM, who has actually given us the seed money to start this project, and the Great Basin LCC to continue having Melanie working for us once her degree was attained at Oregon State. So a lot of people here at Conservation Biology Institute and don't have a clue who we are. So we're a small NGO with a headquarters in Corvallis. There's about 30 of us. A big number is in Corvallis, and we're mostly people behind computers. We run models, we design web tools, and one of the claim to fame of Conservation Biology Institute is the website called databasin.org. It is a website that aims at being a repository of useful spatial data sets for conservation and all sorts of environmental management issues. So if you go onto the web page, you can sign in. It's free to have an account. It's free to look at the data. Visualization is free. If you want to modify something, you will need to enter your name and create a little account so you can save it under your name. You can visualize data that have a dynamic or temporal dimension. You can compare data set by stacking up different spatial data sets, which is what you can see in the lower panel there. We do a lot of these comparisons between model results, for example, with or without land use, or with a warm and dry versus cool and wet future. And then once you have identified a certain number of data sets you're really interested in, you can put everything into a gallery, so the next time you log on, you can directly go to your favorite maps. So next slide, please. One of the things we've been doing in Data Basin is encouraging people to put together some case studies which tell stories about a project, a geography, something that people are interested in and to which we can attach some spatial data sets to illustrate the story. We encourage you to do this. I created one for this particular project. You can see that in the lower right panel circled in orange. Anyone can write a story, send it to us, and we'll upload it with any data sets that you would have available. Next slide, please. A while back, we started putting together what we call Data Basin gateways. They are entries into Data Basin. We have thousands of data sets in there, so it facilitates the of your particular venture into Data Basin. And so we've done this to communicate research project results. These two web pages, for example, show results from a project that was funded by the Yale framework on the left-hand side, and you'll see when you get there results from a series of teams from across the United States. On the right-hand side, this was a data set in collaboration with a Canadian team from BC and Alberta, looking at all sorts of velocity, climate change velocity over the western US. So there's some interactive tools there. Next slide, please. But we also received funding from the landscape conservation cooperatives that were very interested in having people log into Data Basin into these gateways and really access the relevant spatial data sets for that particular geography. And so we have about 24 gateways, and they increase by number every day, so I have a hard time keeping up. I put right there 3 examples. It's the North Pacific, the South Atlantic, and the Caribbean, just to show you that there's different geographies. We're not just Pacific Northwest, and we're even global if possible. Data Basin actually has a version in Spanish, but the LCC have been really key to developing these gateways and really helping us show what can be done with these special data sets online. Next slide, please. So for these, for some of the LCC gateways, such as the South Atlantic, we've been developing special tools by request. And so this, for example, is the Blueprint 2.0, which identifies priority areas for shared conservation action based on ecosystem indicator conditions and connectivity. And if you press on the tab for indicator, you will see different indicators for pine prairie, freshwater marsh, and a particular score for that particular ecosystem. And so this was something they requested. They gave us the data, and we put that on their particular website. Next slide, please. This particular gateway is for the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan area in Southeast California. For this one, we had a group of very diverse stakeholders, and we wanted to make sure people had a pretty good idea of what the conservation issues were. And so Mike Goff, who's the GIS analyst who works at CBI, put together a site survey analyst where you could actually look at the intactness of that area, and this is the map that you can see in blue and green. Everything that's green has not been impacted by humans very much. Everything in blue can be urban or road or mining, something, or a solar development. So it gives you an idea of how fragmented the area is. And we also created other indices such as physical refugia. So if you're in a canyon in the middle of the desert, it's likely to be cooler if you're in the shade than if you're in the middle of the desert. And for each of those areas, we could click on a point and actually see the list of the species that were either endangered or threatened, and their photos would come up. So it gives you a pretty good idea of how to do this. And of course, each of those criteria have been obtained by using a decision support tool, and there's a decision tree that we show on the website, so you can explore it and understand how we came up with that number and that particular level of terrestrial intactness or refugia capability. Next slide, please. But when you create customized web tools like this for an LCC gateway or for any other projects we have, feedback from the user is really critical, and it's really difficult because we know everybody is really busy. But if we don't get feedback, we go our merry way, we do what we like, and then we don't realize that the user wants something very different. Next slide, please. And so about 2 years ago, I was sitting next to Louisa Evers, and after giving my presentation about a model result, it was obvious that, you know, there were few managers in the room, and I was like, how can I reach people who can tell me whether or not this is useful? I'm a climate change scientist. I've done impacts for a long time, and it's always complicated. There's never anything simple that can be explained in 5 seconds. And so to be able to translate what I know and the results from the models that we have into something that can be used and eventually help develop better management strategies is a true challenge. It's complicated. Next slide. And so this was the beginning of this project, focusing on Sagebrush. 2 years ago, I hired Melanie Brown, who was my undergrad student at Oregon State University, and we decided that we were going to work with managers in Eastern Oregon and Western Idaho and get them involved so that we could design a better tool for them to help them get information about climate change and the future that their landscape might be coming to, and the best way possible, the way that they would really be interested in getting onto the web and use our tool. And so the BLM supported that effort, and we started moving forward, and Melanie started doing her work to finish her thesis in undergrad study at OSU. Next slide, please. So the first phase was we needed to know what was useful. We needed to get feedback on climate-related web application to learn what was good, what was bad, how we should approach a new tool specific for Sagebrush. So the first thing we did was send emails, send web surveys, and as always, web surveys that get a minimum response. And Melanie was pretty depressed, so then we put her on the phone, and she started talking to manager, and I have to say a mega thank you to all the managers who spent about an hour and a half with her, giving her all sorts of information that was invaluable to us. And so what she did was first trying to figure out what was a manager's tasks every day. What do they do and how do they interact with the landscape? It sounds funny to any manager, and I've been laughed at by Forest Service managers, for example, when I ask exactly what do you do, but it's true. I work on computers, I can tell you about climate models, but I don't really know what a manager in the field is doing on a daily basis. And so I needed to know this in order to build a better tool. And so the second part of the interview on the phone was walking through 8 different websites that had climate information to find out what were the features that were really more useful than others. And so we went through a set of NOAA sites that we use regularly, and then we went through the National Climate Change Bureau from the USGS, the Desert Research Institute Sagebrush climate tool, and then 2 that we had built for 2 different projects, one for the Forest Service and one for a private university. Next slide, please. And what we learned, the first lesson was, of course, whatever the intent of the person who created the website was, it wasn't enough. People were not using it that way. They did not understand it properly. It was complicated jargon. It was not available. So the intent to really deliver information is not enough. Next slide, please. So these are basically the first lessons we learned. Managers want reliable climate tools, i.e. they want to be able to come back to the same website and find the same thing. They must be easily accessible, so on the web, something that doesn't have too many problems with the firewalls from agencies. The temporal scale was very important. They were interested in seasonal rather than annual average, and especially 30-year average was really a difficult concept. The weather forecast was the most useful for short-term activities, but climate projections were very useful for long-term planning. And there were a variety of important variables apart from temperature and precipitation that we had not taken necessarily into account, and we started making a list of those. Fine spatial scale is, of course, essential for applicability on the ground. And climate science has definitely too much jargon. And I totally agree with that because we've had to learn also what the climate model jargon was. I do impacts, I don't do climate model per se, so it's complicated, definitely. And data sets should be downloadable to include in reports as PDFs, or simply because you want to have your own data on your computer and overlay them with the data that we have. So all this was lesson learned phase 1. Next slide, please. Since we interviewed the participants, we've seen some changes. NOAA has put together the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. It's a fabulous source of information, lots of websites available. But again, it's like it's a big basket full of things, and if you have a lot of time in your hands one evening and you want to spend several hours checking all these websites, it's fabulous, but it's a lot of information. The USGS site that we were showing during our interview has changed address, so it's not there anymore, which is one of the things that the managers had told us. It's like, if you're giving us something, make sure your website moves. Well, this was case in point. And then Melanie had her first paper accepted, and so we're waiting for, she's working on revision. She's going to send it back, and we will send PDFs to everybody who has participated in our phone surveys. Next slide, please. So then step 2 was, okay, we heard from the managers what they were doing, and then we heard what was most useful to them in terms of climate change information. And so we were trying to build tools specifically to meet those needs. And so Barry Baker in Fort Collins did a lot of analysis of climate data, the latest IPCC future climates. Mike was trying to design web tools specifically so they would look appealing, and that the information in there was easy to understand. And Melanie was trying to channel all the managers' needs to both of them, saying, okay, we need to be simple, and yet they are interested in having more information about what the models are and things like that. So it was a constant conversation about building something that was useful. Next slide, please. And the lessons learned in that phase 2 was we really needed to start with the user's needs in mind. We couldn't start from a tool built for something else and suddenly adapt it. It was like, let's start from scratch, because it's much more useful to really have the goal first in front of us to get started. Second, meeting the needs does not always translate into actionable science. Sometimes it's just part of education. People were really interested in knowing, what the climate models were. Well, we can give them that information. That doesn't mean that it's going to change what they're going to do on the ground. But at least they have access to something that's written in a form that they can access easily and understand quickly. Short-term projections are more actionable, so we were really trying to focus on providing those. Impacts projections were more important than just climate very often. It's like, yes, climate could do this, but what does it mean on the ground? And then, of course, the tools have to be simple, but they need to have enough information so that people understand where the information comes from. And then the remark that adaptive management is great in theory, but to apply it, what does it mean on the ground? And what can they do? And can our tool help develop new strategies or reinforce the fact that they could use the same strategies because it would work well? And the last lesson was climate change is often secondary to land use. Sometimes today's land use can really affect the vulnerability of a particular site, and so climate change would be the cherry on the cake and really exacerbate what potential impacts land use had already created there. Next slide, please. So our first challenge, it's like short-term weather forecast versus climate change projections. So when we started this project, my goal was to be able to pass on information about climate change, but it was obvious that managers want short-term information because what they do, they see the results within 4 or 5 years, and so what they want to know when they should plant. They want to know when they're going to prescribe fire to be most effective. So we decided that, yes, we were going to work with NOAA and use map services and serve NOAA's short-term, near-term forecast. So we started doing that, and we had another project with money to design tools. And so what NOAA provides on their website is actually through climate divisions, and we showed this to managers. Melanie did some calls, and of course these were judged too coarse for management. They wanted to know, a particular point within a climate division. Next slide, please. And so it's really complicated because precision doesn't mean accuracy, and we got into the uncertainty of short-term weather models results and then uncertainty in climate model results. And it became really complicated to try to put an about tab on the web trying to explain what differences were. And certain websites do provide 5-day weather forecasts, so it's like, why don't we do that too? And so, next slide, please. it's a real challenge to show it and explain it in a way that makes sense. And so we contacted John Abatzoglou at University of Idaho, who actually downscaled NOAA's short-term forecast to 4 kilometers and on a daily basis. And we said, well, can we actually do map services with your data sets? And yes, we can. And so now we're working with him to put some wording on the website to make sure that people who use this know that there's a lot of uncertainty around it. So people will be able to have access to it, but we will put a big grain of salt, if you want, around the answers, because we would feel really bad if people were using the short-term forecast for activities that will make them waste a lot of money if the forecast is wrong. If there's no crystal ball, so all these models have a lot of uncertainty associated with them, and we want people to be sure that they know about it. One idea that we had was to actually work with people in the field and write mini grants to actually put some weather stations, the very small ones that they put in the field in various places, including in the third world countries, so that they could be uploaded, the data could be uploaded and compared with some of the forecasts to actually verify the accuracy of these forecasts in the last month or so. And so this is an idea that we had, and maybe it's going to move forward, but we're calling NOAA and trying to find out if we could do this, to really work with the people, the managers on the ground, and say, okay, we can give you forecasts, but evaluate yourself how good they are. And if they can do that on a cell phone, for example, comparing what we gave them and what has been recorded in their site, maybe they can get a better feel for what the discrepancies might be. Next slide, please. So then our second challenge was adaptive management. How do we help managers do adaptive management? And we thought decision support tools can really help. And so this is the environmental evaluation modeling system that Tim Sheehan, who is a PhD student at OSU and also doing fire modeling and decision support tool development at CBI, designed. And so it's a decision tree program. For example, on the left-hand side, you can see a map that shows climate buffering capacity for a particular geography, and we arrive at that map by associating a shade map and a soil water quality. And if you have high soil water capacity and high shade, then you get, of course, a great climate buffering capacity, and the reverse is true. So but we do these association of spatial data sets to arrive at an answer to a particular management question. On the right-hand side, you see a map of partial California, and if you go to the climateconsult.org, you will see that you have a bar chart where you have different categories of environmental categories like site sensitivity, climate exposure, and if you click on the bar, you'll see the map, and the map will be explained by a decision tree underneath, and you can go through that tree, click on every box, and the different map will show up on the screen so that you can see what values are associated with each of those spatial layers. And Mike Goff, of course, has designed this so that it's interactive on the web, and Tim designed the modeling system. Next slide, please. We are also designing other types of tools. This is a Forest Service project. I just wanted to put this out there because I think it might be relevant to Sagebrush. Nick Molnar is putting together a website where we can figure out what the climate associated with a particular seed lot is today, and then look into the future where that climate is going to be. So if you grow seedlings in a particular seed lot and you want to know where they're going to be the most productive 25 or 30 years from now, you can look at the climate of today at that seed lot on a map of future climate and see where it might be. And the reverse, if you have an area that you want to plant and harvest timber, you want to know where you should get your seedlings. And so knowing the climate of your site today and knowing this climate of your site 50 years from now, where should you be looking for a seed lot that would have a climate most relevant to what is going to be at your site in the future. And so I was thinking, because a lot of sagebrush restoration use different variety of different species of sagebrush, but also plants that are adapted to different temperature regime, we could use a similar sort of tool, design it specifically for sagebrush. Next slide, please. And so what we're doing right now is actually we're improving our decision tree by putting it in 3D. So we're moving forward with that one. And we're also going to start putting it online by the end of the year. I think it'll be there. So that if you don't like the tree that we've created to answer a question, you'll be able online to move the boxes around and change the factors that can weigh one layer versus the other. Make your own decision tree to answer your own question. So that's our big dream. And we have received at least some of the funding to do this, and so we will move forward. And like I said, by December we should have this done. And Taylor Hutch is the young programmer who loves doing visualization, who's working with Tim right now to make this reality. Next slide, please. So our third challenge was impacts were more important than climate per se for a lot of managers. Now, my team runs a dynamic global vegetation models. We do vegetation cover, land use, carbon stocks, carbon sequestration potential, and fire impacts. But its coarse scale, we run at 800 meters, which is still too coarse for managers. We also don't use species because, in general, we run very, very large areas. When you run global, you don't want to have species because you wouldn't be able to find the right parameters for it. So we use functional types, which don't mean too much to managers who are particularly interested in a piece of ground that's not that big. And so we could, go very fine and start talking about species, but really the model was never designed for it. So this is not the right tool to really help managers move forward, except to show general regional trend. Next slide, please. So we talked with Melanie, and Melanie had it in her head after talking to all the managers on the phone that she would, help us think about a landscape simulator for sagebrush country. So she put this together, got people on the phone and said, what do you think about this? People were excited about this. They didn't really like in the lower left you have sagebrush density. They wanted % cover, which wouldn't be a problem. They also wanted to have more than just sagebrush % cover, but also how many invasives were there. And then on the lower right, she had put a various number of management things, grazing regime, energy installation, stand replacing fire, so prescribed fire versus wildfires. So we were interested in doing this, but there were a few things that were not too realistic, and the managers were more interested in having a better handle on the management schemes and strategies. So we agreed with that. And next slide, please. So this is where it started, and this is where we're going with it. So Taylor Much is actually looking at 3D visualization of the ground. This just represents grasses and flowers right now. And if you tip the photo over, you see the % cover, and I put it on the side there on the right. But so if we start really looking at sagebrush, we could put invasive grasses, native grasses. We could put sagebrush. We could put junipers. We can start dealing with this. And to run this, obviously, we'll need a model to tell us what the densities are. And so VDDT or any state and transition model like STSIM or something actually spatial could help us work out where the vegetation should be, the density. Barry Baker, who's worked a lot in rangeland, was really interested in looking at different grazing densities. And of course, we work Tim is a fire ecologist, and we've done a lot of fire work too. So working with a few people around the area here, we would like to actually play with different prescription fires, fire prescription levels. So next slide, please. So to actually create this tool, it will take a village, and we have no doubt about that. And we had thought about maybe asking Todd to put a data workshop in his next LCC meeting, conference, gathering of some type, and so we could actually show to, let's say, 20 people what we're trying to do and ask them if they have data that they would like us to use to actually make our tool a little bit better, more realistic, more useful to people in the field. But we are contacting PRBO because they're interested in sagebrush and birds, so we're interested in showing habitat quality. If we do 3D, we can actually start looking in that direction. I have worked with Megan Kreutzberg and Jessica linking a big model showing regional trends with a VDDC, so a state and transition model. And finally, here on campus, Lisa Ellsworth has a lot of experience working on sagebrush and fire, and so she's really interested in putting together this workshop and trying to get all the data and working with Taylor and Barry and Mike and trying to put this new website together. But we know that, you know, we have a big dream and we're going to try to get as close to as possible to the big dream, but we know that the inputs are going to be essential. And so we want to engage everybody who's interested in working with us on this tool to work with us, to call us. We have seed money to this big tool from BLM, and so we're starting the project, the development of that particular tool, July 1st. Next slide, please. And of course, we know that we will never reach perfection, but we will try to do that with your help. Next slide, please. And I want to thank you for your attention, and the next slide will introduce the next speaker.
Would that be me?
Yes, Dave.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here with Fish and Wildlife Service, and I guess one of the first things I should say is that we are not land managers outside of our refuge system. So working in ecological services, what we're trying to do is identify some landscapes that we think should be priorities for working on, that have compelling conservation challenges as well as payback. And among those, of course, is the sagebrush steppe. You know, having just gone through the whole sage-grouse candidate review and deciding that we needed to work more with partners to do conservation efforts before we drove into a major listing decision. In any case, so some of the areas we have selected include a lot of sage steppe, that being the southwest corner of Idaho as well as portions of eastern Idaho. At this point, we took an interest in this model and sat in. I sat in and provided a review. Again, I'm not sure how much has changed at this point, but I know what we'd like to do is go forward with partners, and that can include partners, say, that ranchers and the like, private landholders, where we're going to work with them to do potentially restoration projects on smaller plots of land, say 100 acres, maybe as much as 800 acres. But as far as scale goes, places like BLM, you know, they would be other partners, and they'd be working with potentially much larger areas. I think one of the things, Dominique, you showed in your slide presentation just now was the seed source tool by Nick Molinar, and then you came right up and stated that designing a tool similar to that would help us in projecting where we would have sagebrush in the future, or different varietals, or anyway, different species potentially even. Those might allow us to better identify where we could be more effective in targeting those areas for conservation. Again, no reason in putting our money or that of the BLM in areas that aren't going to be sagebrush in, say, 20 years, 30 years. So this kind of tool would be really helpful for us to focus our attentions on areas in the future. Go ahead.
Glad to hear. Thank you.
But again, I think some of it for us, there was earlier in your slideshow, you also talked about impact projections were more important than just climate, and I guess that's where it does take us back to vegetation. Just having predictive models or projections on, say, rainfall or temperature for us is somewhat limited, and for reasons like that, having a better feel for how the vegetation zones are going to shift or change, allowing us to then focus with our partners on doing conservation in those areas is going to be more valuable to us. But again, what I'm seeing in the model right now looks like it's really headed in that direction. Again, especially if we can work on some additional tools, or I like the seed source tool only with regard to sagebrush ecosystems and where we'd expect to see resiliency in those ecosystems as time goes forward.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Yes, and one thing I didn't say, we are going to build a console that will provide specific climate for Sagebrush country for the Great Basin. And so you will have access to project, just like I showed for the California Council. We're going to build something like this for Great Basin that will focus on climate. And then we will have, you know, the regional projections of where things might change. Our big model can show, you know, things that are likely to change phenotype or, you know, plant functional type, whether it's going to go from a shrub to a grass or things like that. The only problem is it's really difficult to deal with invasives because they're not necessarily driven entirely by climate. But that's why we want to build the other tool based on real data, and hopefully we will have an inroad into remote sensing to be able to see where things have been changing in the last 30 years. But we're just beginning that one. But the Climate Council will exist just for the Great Basin. That one will be separate, and we will build it specifically for that purpose.
I guess one of the things I would add is I don't know if there are folks representing BLM today. I'm guessing there were. We invited a number of them. There are so many different, you know, potential models out there. It might be really good, and Todd, you may be playing a real major role in this, is just getting more people involved with regard to both BLM, multiple partners. You mentioned the bird observatories earlier, Dominique.
Yep.
Probably really important for the Great Basin LCC could play a really big role in trying to bring more of those people together and using one tool, or at least introducing them to that tool.
Yeah.
Again, otherwise we could end up with, I can't imagine we'd have competing projections and the like, but all working off of one tool or multiple tools if they are supportive of one another would certainly allow us to prioritize restoration projects or what's needed on the ground as a, you know, again, a multi-partner group.
Yes. Yeah, we're looking forward to this, and this is actually one of the goals of this webinar, is to say this is what we're doing. If you want to work with us, it'd be great. And, you know, we have one model in-house. That's why we've been using. We know VDDT and STSIM, so that's what we're pushing forward. The reason why we said we would like to have a data workshop at some point is to actually bring people together who have data but also models. We can pretty much put anything we want in that tool online. So, and while the climate modelers have been really good at showing ensemble of models, of climate models, the ecologists have not been so good, and it's really hard to find something that shows you the different approaches and how models agree, impacts model agree or not. And so we would love to do that. And the more impacts model, the better. And different approaches really reinforce, you know, the results that each model will show. So we would love to work with partners in that direction. Okay,
and I would guess that folks like Matt Germino or others who really have access to the data are going to be more useful. Again, Fish and Wildlife Service, of course, we tend to be so much more focused on listing issues and actual on-the-ground restoration or contributing to that. We're not really renowned for data collection, at least not out of ecological services at the scale needed for a project like this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks, Dave, and thank you, Dominique. Very interesting presentation. Lots of potential there, and as you said, a lot of opportunities to partner. I think we'll see if we have any questions that have been typed in. Liz?
Yeah, we have one question typed in, and I'll just remind folks that if you have any questions that you would like to ask either of our speakers, please go ahead and type those in now, and I'll read them out as they come in. The first question that we have here is, have you seen the preliminary seed zone maps for a number of Great Basin plant species? And Dominique, this came up during your presentation a little bit earlier.
Yes, I have, and that's why I thought that this would be really useful to, instead of designing a tool only for trees for the Forest Service, that we could start thinking about how we could really take this tool and adapt it to Sagebrush. Yes, that's why I'm thinking about it.
Great, and we also had just one comment that came through that I'll share with you regarding opportunities to bring people together to discuss this. One of our attendees pointed out that there are a couple potential opportunities for that. One is the Great Basin Consortium meeting coming up in February of 2017, and the other would be the next Fire Ecology Congress in November of 2017.
Great, thank you.
Dominique,
Those
this
are the
is
questions
Todd.
I have here at the moment. Oh, go ahead, Todd.
I was going to ask one for in the room here. So when would the Great Basin Planning Atlas, when do you think that that might be available publicly?
Okay, you're talking about the gateway?
Well, you mentioned the climate change portal that you have for California that will be available for Great Basin.
Okay, so I talked to Mike Goff, and he told me it'll take him about 2 weeks to work on it. I suspect that it'll probably take a little longer, but I would say that midsummer, so at the end of July, probably, it'll be available.
Excellent, thank you. Liz, did I cut you off? Are there questions?
No, no other questions have come in yet. Dave, did you have any questions from the folks in the room with you?
They are actually logged onto a different computer and can provide questions if they have any.
Okay, great. So if anyone has a question for either of our speakers, please go ahead and type that in your chat box now. As a reminder, you may have to click the red arrow to expand your little control panel to let you see the chat box.
Okay then, well thank you everybody for attending today's webinar. I want to remind you the recording of the presentation will be available on our website later this week. And if you have any questions about the LCC or this research, please feel free to contact either myself, Dominique, or Dave. Our contact information there is up on the screen. And last but not least, we really want to know what you thought of today's webinar. Please take our short 2-minute survey that'll pop up after you log off. We use that feedback to improve our future webinars and the style and content, and it helps us plan for more effective communications in the future. Thank you very much, and good day, everyone.